This episode is brought to you by Innova Fertility and Reproductive Health. Located in Toronto, Ontario, Innova is the first next-generation IVF center in Canada. For more information, head over to innovafertility.com. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 158. Welcome to the 158th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I am really excited to share today's episode with you. In today's episode, I'm interviewing Dr. Mary Lee Barron. And what's really exciting about that is that she's been working in the field of fertility awareness for over 20 years. And she's actually a researcher. So she has published peer-reviewed scientific papers around specifically the issue of fertility awareness. And so in today's episode, we actually talk about some of the research that she's done regarding effectiveness. And it's very, very interesting research. And I think really important, especially when you're considering using this method as your primary form of birth control, to really know how it stacks up to some of the hormonal methods that we are more used to. And also, Dr. Barron talks about the Marquette method, which is really interesting. So, there's so many different types of fertility awareness monitoring. Obviously, there's like a common theme in all of them, but there are different ways to chart, and there are different methods of recording and understanding and identifying the fertile window. And so I'm really excited to share a different perspective with you because Dr. Barron is the first guest on the show to really take us into Marquette and give us a window as to what that looks like. So if you're new to fertility awareness, or you've been charting your cycles for a while and you're looking for some support so that you can feel really, really confident about charting and also get that window into what your cycles are saying about your overall health, make sure to head over to my Work With Me page and take a look at the programs that I offer. So you can head over to fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. And if you're not sure exactly which program is best for you, then make sure to set up a consultation with me, a 15-minute consult, and we could talk about what the options are and really try to figure out which program is going to work the best for you. So that's over at fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. And before we jump into today's show, I just want to take a moment and thank our sponsor, Innova Fertility.
This is Dr. Margie Dixon, CEO and founder of Innova Fertility and Reproductive Health in Toronto. As a veteran reproductive endocrinologist and infertility specialist, I'm a huge proponent of women getting educated on their fertility. It's true that knowledge is power, ladies. In 2016, I created Innova with the goal to be the leader in innovation, education, and communication for high-quality and humanized fertility and reproductive care, and I'm proud that we have the first next-generation IVF lab in Canada. We built our lab to support our mission to bring the latest technology, science, and evidence-based medicine to fertility treatment. With the science and tech in place, our highly experienced team is focused on humanizing the all-too-often clinical approach out there. It's been a year, and I'm thrilled Innova is celebrating her first birthday this month. We have helped so many of our patients begin beautiful new love stories in their families this year, and I couldn't be more proud. If you're in the Toronto area and are interested in learning more about IVF from our medical team, we welcome you to sign up for IVF 101 education sessions at our center. Please visit our website at Innova, that's ANOVA, fertility.com, under our services tab to register. For those of you who may be out of province or out of country, we may also be able to help. Email info@innovafertility.com to request a medical consultation by Skype. Remember, the first step in success is understanding your specific fertility situation. The next is finding a qualified fertility specialist team you're comfortable with. Whether that is Innova, and I hope it is, or at another qualified center, I sincerely wish you every success in creating your next love story. Enjoy the rest of the podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon. For more information about Dr. Dixon, if you haven't had a chance to listen to episode number 109, definitely check it out. The title of the episode is The Reality of Aging and Fertility, IVF and Assisted Reproductive Technology, and the Future of Fertility Treatments. A truly eye-opening episode. Without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. And today I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Dr. Mary Lee Barron, to the show. Dr. Barron is a family nurse practitioner and an associate professor in the School of Nursing, Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. That's a lot of words. I'll do my best.
It's SIUE for short.
Okay, SIUE, yes. She is the director of Marquette Fertility Education, offering direct patient care services and research in natural family planning, and she began working in OBGYN in 1975 as a staff nurse. Her NP clinical experience has focused on OBGYN in a variety of settings. She has taught natural family planning for 20 years, and she's also served in the U.S. Naval Reserve for 14 years, which is really interesting. And in addition to that, Dr. Barron has published over 20 peer-reviewed journal articles. And I'm really excited to talk with you today, Dr. Barron. We'll be talking about the Marquette method of fertility awareness and delve into some of the research that you've done and the years and wealth of knowledge that you have on fertility awareness-based methods, natural family planning in particular. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Before we get into all the nitty-gritty, I would love to hear how you found yourself in this field in general. What drew you to natural family planning and how you ended up doing all these amazing years of research in this area?
Well, I am a Catholic, and I started out probably not with real ears to hear the church's teaching on contraception. And I, as a young engaged woman, I don't think I had ears to hear about it. And then when I was in my nurse practitioner program, which was a master's degree as a family nurse practitioner, what I got was about natural family planning was natural family planning doesn't work. Let's talk about something that does. End of story. One sentence. And so later, when I investigated natural family planning after I was working with women, I was prescribing the birth control pill at the time, among other hormonal methods. And I was pretty good at managing the side effects. And I didn't give too much thought to the mechanism of how the pill worked. I just didn't really examine that too closely. And so when I finally got the message about natural family planning with the charts and everything, I was absolutely stunned with their diagnostic value. And then my husband and I decided to use it because obviously it's a very healthy option. And that all kind of came together with a serious taking a look at what kind of Catholic I really was. And I wanted to be serious in my Catholicism. And I understood that the rules applied to me. That was sort of a heavenly message, if you will, that the rules do apply. And so we looked at it very seriously. We found that it had totally enhanced our marriage, and that professionally, I was stunned, as I said, with how wonderful the charts were for actually diagnosing women. When I was prescribing birth control pills, that they're so commonly used in the United States for cramps or acne or any kind of problem you can think of, we prescribe them, but they don't cure anything. They manage the symptoms. And then there was the moral and ethical issue of the low-dose birth control pills do not suppress ovulation all the time. So their mechanism for action is that they thin out the uterine lining so much that the fertilized ovum cannot implant. And when I really let myself think about that, I couldn't live with doing that anymore, because that's a little human being, in my view. And so the other part that made me angry about that is women aren't shared. People don't share that with women. So they have this vague idea that it stops ovulation, but it just doesn't do it all the time. And so I thought women have a right to informed consent. They have a right to know everything they should know about a drug they're putting in their bodies. And so it made me very passionate about doing natural family planning. So I did go and become a Creighton model teacher. I did that for 5 years. I kind of overlapped that because when the startup of the Marquette method came along with the Clear Blue Fertility Monitor, I felt like couples would be most satisfied with that. And so then I became a Marquette teacher. And since 2002, I've continuously taught Marquette.
One of the things that you mentioned as well is that you had initially learned through the Creighton model system, and then you switched to the Marquette system. Maybe you could share a little bit about the Marquette system, because many of the listeners may not be familiar with it. What are some of the similarities and differences to some of the other methods?
Okay, so with Marquette, we teach the electronic hormonal monitoring, which was initially by the Clear Blue Fertility Monitor. And the Clear Blue Fertility Monitor, when it came to market, it was for achieving pregnancy. And they did a study in Italy where they got 40 women, and God bless these 40 women, because they had to have a daily ultrasound. And they compared the ultrasound with the accuracy of the biomarkers. So the Clear Blue was 100% effective at identifying ovulation. the clear blue detects the rise of estrogen and the surge of luteinizing hormone LH, which causes ovulation. They looked at temperature, which was 33% effective, and they looked at mucus, which was 48%. So mucus is the observation of cervical mucus is a sensitive marker for ovulation, but it's not a specific marker for ovulation, meaning that other things can cause your mucus to appear. And so for some women, that is a major barrier because they have a very difficult time reading their mucus. And you get the mucus cycle can be longer than the fertile window actually is. And so then that can result in a lot of abstinence to make the method effective. So when I was teaching a mucus-only method, I saw some of the issues with that. And so with Marquette, when we added in the clear blue fertility monitor, couples were able to learn the method very quickly, and they had a lot of accuracy with the method. And so we then, as a research group, we tested the effectiveness of the Marquette method. Now, I'm going to say something about effectiveness here because it's important for people to understand that perfect use is a measure that is a statistical probability, and it is when people follow the instructions of any given method 100% of the time, all the time they follow the instructions. What you should be interested in is typical use because that's what we human beings do. So an example of that typical use is condoms, for example. If 100 women use condoms for contraception for a year, 85 of those will not become pregnant and 15 will become pregnant. That's typical use. So with birth control pills, they advertise 99% effectiveness, but that's perfect use. Overall pregnancy rate on birth control pills is actually 92%. So 8 women in a year will become pregnant, typically using the birth. And so when you talk about natural family planning, it depends on how many biomarkers that you're using and how consistent you are with the method and what have you. So most natural family planning methods are going to range somewhere between 86, 95% typical use. 95% when it's taught correctly and correctly applied. So with the method on our pilot study, we were 93% effective. And our ranges have depended on whether or not there was one biomarker such as the monitor or 2 biomarkers. We do teach women about temperatures, but we empower couples to use what works for them. Like you have women who, let's say a woman was molested as a child, for example. I had a patient who was like this. There was no way this woman was going to observe cervical mucus. So she just used a monitor, and that was it, a monitor by itself. Now, a monitor by itself, used with our fertility algorithm, is about 93% effective. Monitor and mucus together is sometimes it's about 88% effective, depending. So I like to say there's a range of 88 to 93%. So I think it compares very favorably with artificial contraception in its effectiveness. But the beauty of NFP, of course, is that you can not only avoid pregnancy, but that you can achieve pregnancy and that it is a couple-centered method. So back to the clear blue. So the initial monitor was used, and then since that time, the company has put out a little handheld monitor called the Clear Blue Digital Advanced. We've also looked into the use of LH sticks because they're very inexpensive and how effective they are for used with a fertility algorithm, and they're pretty effective. So we're actively researching that as I speak.
Okay, well, would you be able to break it down for me a little bit? So I'm trained in the Just East method, which has a lot of similarity to cretin. So as you can imagine, I have a really hard time even understanding how it works. So share with us then, based on the monitor, how do you know when your fertile window begins? I can appreciate how you would know when it ends, but how would you know when it begins?
So the monitor, because it detects the estrogen rise, and the estrogen rise is what triggers the appearance of mucus, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the hormone that causes the mucus to thin out and become like egg white.
Yeah.
So by detecting the estrogen, the monitor gives you 4 to 5 days in advance of ovulation. Okay. And then when it detects LH, it gives you a day or two before ovulation. And so, because ovulation after the LH rises, and it does it very dramatically, ovulation will occur within 36 hours of that.
Okay.
And so what we have people do is they use the monitor from day 6, the first cycle they ever use the monitor. They're going to start monitoring their urine. It's a urine test, and they dip a little monitor stick in the test, in the urine, and then they put it into the monitor, and it takes about 5 minutes to read it. And then they get a reading for the day. So their reading is either low, where there's no estrogen rise, high, where the estrogen rise begins, and peak, where you have the LH surge. So they'll get 4 to 5 days of high. They'll get their peak, which is 1 to 2 days. It'll be programmed to say 2 days, high and low. So after the peak, there's a 3 count. Just like with observation of cervical mucus, once you get a peak day, then you count 3 before you would resume relations if you're trying to avoid a pregnancy.
Okay. Well, that's
that make
really,
sense?
It does. And it's interesting that it measures the estrogen levels. That makes a lot of sense. So then what happens when you have a woman who has a delay in her ovulation due to stress or illness or something like that? How does that play out with the Clear Blue monitor?
Okay. So first of all, the monitor has a memory of 6 months of cycles. So let's say a woman's normally has cycles that vary from 31 to 37 days. Okay. So the monitor wouldn't even ask for the first test until day 10. So there's this trying to kind of predict where the fertile window is going to occur. Now the monitor has the capacity to do 20 tests. So the woman can test every day. And then let's say it's a little bit delayed. So it would continue to stay in low, and then it'll go to high, and that part could be delayed there. And then after the woman gets to her peak day, the day of the LH surge, after that she stops testing. Now, if it was really delayed where there would be 20 tests, then the monitor would just go to low, and it wouldn't ask for any more tests at that point. Now, when I'm working with a couple and let's say there was that delay, then we would have her, she could use the Clear Blue Digital Advance, which is like an ovulation predictor kit. She could re-trigger her monitor. There's a number of tricks that we have to use the monitor to capture that fertile window should there be a stress occur in a delay.
Okay. And then are there women who are just it wouldn't work for, or does it pretty much work for everybody?
The monitor company says that doesn't recommend the monitor for women who have polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, and breastfeeding women. Now, as a nurse practitioner and fertility educator, I can tell you that women who have PCOS, who are well managed, they're taking a medication called metformin, for example, to regulate their cycles. Those women, they've used a monitor without difficulty. I have one patient who I started her on metformin, and she wanted to get pregnant, and 4 months later she was pregnant. It regularized her cycles. So those are decisions that can be made in a very individualized way. Now with breastfeeding, we do have a breastfeeding protocol. And the monitor people don't recommend using it, but we figured out how to use it backwards, if you will. And using the feature of 20 tests, we've been able to figure out an algorithm for using it during breastfeeding. And we've done the research to verify that that is an effective use.
Well, yeah, it's really interesting. It's really different, obviously, than relying primarily on mucus. And I think that I mean, I think there are definitely challenges with mucus. So as I'm sure you encountered in your work, the more that I work with women and even myself in my own personal use of the method, had I not learned from an instructor who could share with me the different patterns so that I could have a really clear understanding day by day what was happening, then I really don't know that I would have been able to rely on mucus. So in order for me to rely on mucus, I needed to have that person helping me.
Listen to what you just said. You had to have a teacher helping you. And this is one of the issues with effectiveness of natural family planning. When the government does the studies of effectiveness of the different methods of family planning, they dump all of the natural family planning people into one pool. So that if I had somebody tell me that I ovulate on day 14, and they asked me if I used periodic abstinence, and I said yes, I would get put into the same bucket as you do who used Justice and had someone teach you. You would get put into the same pool as a Marquette method user. It's very sloppy to do it that way, and then they report these poor effectiveness rates, which do not reflect the reality. The second point is that learning from a teacher is really important. And what I tell my patients is that NFP is experiential learning. You have to experience it to learn it. And the other kind of experience learning that we have in our lives is learning to drive a car. You could hardly read a book about driving a car and then drive a car, right?
Of course not.
You need a driving coach, right? And so it is with NFP. You need a coach to help you understand what's going on in your body.
Well, and I think that it's a very romantic notion. I'm becoming one with my body. I'm learning about my cycle. It's a really romantic notion to think that because it's this, getting to know your body type of thing, that you can do it on your own. But in terms of effectiveness, in order and confidence, effectiveness and confidence,
yes,
you need to really, just from my experience, I know personally that I would not have been as confident. So although I would have been in love with the idea of it. And so you had spoken about some really interesting, and you have touched on it as well, but I'd love to talk a little bit more about that concept of effectiveness. Something that we've talked about on the show, the difference between typical effectiveness and perfect use effectiveness. And even, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but I really like differentiating between user failure and method failure. I think those are important distinctions to be made as well. So I'd love to hear what your research has uncovered in those areas.
Okay. So I don't think, I think there are method failure pregnancies. I do. I've certainly witnessed them. I had one couple that the thing about going to an NFP teacher is when you do become pregnant, we do ask people to come in and let us show them when they got pregnant, the high likelihood of when they got pregnant, if they have accurately recorded their sexual activity. And so I had a couple who the fertile window is 6 days, 5 days of sperm survival and 1 day of egg survival. And so I had a couple that was using the mucus method only, and they got pregnant. And so I had them come in and I looked at their chart and I said, you really didn't have any sexual activity during this time? And the guy said, absolutely not. We did not. And I said, okay, that's great. I said, I think you really have hardy sperm because it's 7 or 8 days. And he went, yes, and threw out his chest. It was really funny. So there are method failures, but I think that user failure is more likely. And here's what it sounds like. Young couples who are married want to have kids. A lot of young couples want to have kids. And it isn't a black and white kind of thing. Today we're going to avoid, tomorrow we'll achieve. There's a lot of shades of gray about that motive to become pregnant. And so here's the example I use with my couples, which is she's a school teacher. She wants to have a baby in May because that way she'll be off all summer. And that would work out perfectly in her mind. But you know what? They went away for a weekend in June and they took a chance. And now they're pregnant and she's due in March. That's typical use. Typical use is, well, maybe that mucus just wasn't quite as stretchy as I thought. Maybe that's really not fertile. And so they have intercourse, and that's typical use. there is this negotiation going on where you're doing this proverbial taking a chance. But that's what human beings do. And if you think about the woman who is 41, has 4 children, and has decided that 4 is the magic number, that's where they're stopping, compared to the 29-year-old recently married person who's thinking about children in her future, who's the better at using NFP? Somebody that's going to the size of their family, or somebody who still is anticipating pregnancy? Well, I think we know the answer on that.
Well, you did an interesting study on the influence of motivation on effectiveness, and you've been doing this for 20 years. Wouldn't it be interesting to be a fly on the wall in your brain at all the different scenarios that you've seen over the years? And
oh, sure.
And I mean, what I've found is that I come from a place of really understanding and non-judgment. Having a child is a really big decision. And even if you want children, there's never a perfect time, like in a way, if you really think about it. And so I feel like it's a really big decision. And I think it's natural to allow, to some extent, for it to happen. And I think that I see some women that are they're very firm. Like, I do not want a child right now. This is not a good time. This is not for me. And then not right now anyways. And then I have other women that are, yes, I want a child 6 months ago. This is ridiculous. I've been trying for a long time. And then I have women in the middle who, well, if it happened, not a big deal. If it didn't, not a big deal. We're not really trying yet. And I think it's important to respect all of those, but understand how it can affect the effectiveness of the method.
Yeah. And you're quite correct. But you know what the flip side of that is fertility delayed is fertility denied sometimes. And we have the opposite problem of women who wait, and they're 35, 36, and now thinking, well, I want to have a baby. And it doesn't happen as instantly as they would like it to. Does that make sense?
It does. Did you want to talk a little bit about some of the factors? I mean, I have a lot to say about that, and I'm sure you do as well, but some of the factors that are contributing to this and what we should really all know about our fertility, I suppose.
Yeah, that's where I was led to fertility health literacy. And it's this idea that the waiting and that I don't want to be pregnant now is not a good time, and how you really come to that decision. But also the notion that you need to take care of your fertility and what women actually do know about their fertility health. And so with that, I put that on my website, which is marquettefertilityed.com. I hope you don't mind my telling that.
Of course.
But I had done some preconception counseling with a couple, and I had gotten all finished with her and telling her all the things that I thought that she needed to do to have a healthy baby. And I got finished, and the husband said to me, well, what about me? And I thought, I don't know. What about you? Boxers or jockeys? I just sort of dumbfounded. And I thought, I have to look into this. And so here's what I found out. Many of the same things that affect women's fertility affect male fertility. Use menstrual cycle as the vital sign for women. Use the quality of semen, sperm, as the male fertility sign. And the same habits that men and women do to have healthy fertility are the same habits that prevent cardiovascular disease and diabetes later in life. It's that strong. And so the thing is things like not smoking, being of normal body weight for a man. Every 20 pounds that this guy is overweight, his risk of infertility goes up by 10%. And so here's another way to think about this. Everybody knows somebody that's diabetic, right? Don't you think? Do you know somebody that's diabetic?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So the rate of diagnosed diabetes in the United States is 9.3%. Now, there's a lot of other people out there who are, in fact, diabetic, but they are not diagnosed. Okay. So diagnosed diabetes. The rate of infertility in the United States is 10%. So it is truly the elephant in the room. So what can we tell people for healthy fertility before they've even thought of this as even an issue? And so there are some surprising things, like for a guy, the guy who sits there with a laptop on his lap for an hour raises the temperature of his scrotum by 1 degree. that doesn't sound like much, but sperm don't like that. They don't do well with that. There are other things that men can do to damage. And the biggest one for men and women that I am alarmed about is the use of marijuana. Now, marijuana is very disruptive to ovulation, and it causes sperm. There's more sperm that are abnormally shaped. They have 2 heads or 2 tails. They decrease in number, but they do not have the ability to fertilize an egg. And women get the THC, which is the chemical that's in marijuana. It gets into the vaginal secretions. And when the sperm encounter it in the vaginal secretions, it decreases their ability to fertilize an egg. So not a good thing for either of them to be using. But here around the country, we're legalizing all this marijuana, and nobody's talking that it has any negative effects. I keep waiting to hear that in the press, and I don't hear it, that there's a health concern. And then tobacco, of course, diminishes fertility in both genders. There's the issue of the weight. There's the issue of exercise. Getting the healthy fats in diets is very important. Women need healthy fat in order to make hormones, in order to ovulate. Men need healthy fat. And it isn't that low fat is good. Low fat's not good for us. We need the right kinds of fats in our diets. And we need it to prevent cardiovascular disease and diabetes, as well as we need it for our healthy fertility. And a lot of women have problems with the whole blood sugar insulin resistance thing as the reason for their difficulties with ovulation. That's PCOS. And so the right kinds of diets are important for that reason too. So it's about a healthy nutrition, healthy bodies is important here. I could go on, but there's other factors. And I just think that people aren't really aware of that direct effect.
I think it's really interesting, the point that you made, the potential connection there between infertility and diabetes. I've spoken about PCOS quite a bit on the podcast. I've had a number of great guests on the show, and we've hashed it out in a number of different ways. But what's interesting about PCOS is arguably it should be called, cardiometabolic syndrome or metabolic syndrome. And if you have PCOS, you're more likely to develop diabetes later on. So it's related. It's in the family. They're like cousins. And so interesting because it directly interferes with your ability to ovulate, just as you said. And it's a result of this whole process that's going on. So I think that the points you're making are very important, which is that essentially your fertility is a marker of your health. So if your fertility is off, it means that your health is off. And it's kind of like just as simple as that in many ways.
It is. Yeah. It's very clear to me that is definitely the case, and that it is men and women. So we can't exclude the guys from this. Mm-hmm. Men are not educated about their fertility. They're educated about the mechanics of intercourse, but that's about it.
It's interesting that we're having this conversation. So earlier this morning, I recorded an interview with Mark Sklar. So our interview won't be released necessarily right after it, just because of the way I have my schedule set up. But in that interview, it was focused specifically on men, sperm quality, sperm count, what can affect it, and why it matters. And so he was putting up some pretty big numbers on the board because based on his clinical experience and what the research says is that men are just as likely to have and to be the person with the issue as women. So we have the skewed idea that it's the woman the majority of the time, but it turns out it's just as likely to be him. And with all, you mentioned laptops, cell phones, there's so many reasons why men's fertility is being challenged. Everything is estrogenic. I mean, a conversation about the most common conversation. Yeah, with all the most common conversation that I have with clients of mine, and even within some of the groups that I do, that feels the most overwhelming is the conversation about reducing xenoestrogens in your home and in your life. I find that in particular leaves people the most overwhelming. And the reason it leaves them overwhelmed is because we're surrounded by these plastics and chemicals and scents and all of those things. And so that impacts male fertility as well. It has to.
It's right. have filled our world, 80,000 chemicals. How many insults can your body take? And so we're also seeing things like thyroid disease as a result. Processed soy, for example, not only estrogenic, but thyrotoxic. And so we're seeing a lot of thyroid disease as a result of the autoimmune reaction, 8-to-1 women to men on that. So this is a very important issue to get out there.
Well, and over the years, you've done a lot of research in the area of, fertility awareness, natural family planning. What are some of the topics that stand out to you? I have a number of things here that I could talk with you about. I know you did a study on light exposure and how it impacts the menstrual cycle.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, let me tell you about light exposure. This is a really interesting one. Okay, so the age of electricity, human beings didn't have light at night, right? We didn't have light exposure at nighttime unless there was a bright full moon. So then comes electricity, and we have this assumption that light at night is a benign thing. And we are very sensitive as human beings to the color spectrum, meaning does red light affect us? Does blue light affect us? And if they do, how does it affect us? And so if you talk to anybody that lives in Alaska, for example, when they have the 23-hour night or the 23-hour day, women are not, their ovulation isn't what it was when you have just light at night. I mean, light during the daytime. And so the reason for that is the sleep hormone is melatonin. And melatonin is the anti-cancer hormone as well. It's a scavenger of free radicals. So women who work at night, like nurses, have a higher rate of breast cancer because they're exposed to the light at night. And night workers, after 4 years on nights, have shorter menstrual cycles. Now, one of the reasons for that is because melatonin is in the fluid that surrounds the egg. So the little cyst that you form has melatonin in it. And that melatonin acts on estrogen, it acts on your progesterone level, it acts on LH and FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. So it's very intimately involved in ovulation. So when you are exposed to light at night, you suppress your melatonin. You make it go down. It causes sleep. If you're in the light, then your body thinks it's not time to sleep, so your hormone levels go down. So do you see how that could easily disrupt ovulation and how it could easily, you don't get the action on the anti-cancer stuff? Does that make sense?
It does. And I think that it's so interesting because I feel like you can hear that, and nod your head and stuff like that. But I feel like unless you actually put it into practice and really implement it. So this is something that we've spoken about a few different times on the podcast and clarified what it means to be dark. It means pitch. Can't see your hand in front of your face. It means,
what I tell people is hotel room dark, because usually hotel rooms are very dark. And if you look at your wall at night, you should not be able to see a photograph on the wall. Mm-hmm. You should not be able to make the outline of that picture. And that's my quick and dirty way of saying. And also your alarm clock can have red, because that is, in studies, that's a placebo light. It doesn't affect your light exposure at night. But you should not have blue or green on that alarm clock, because we are sensitive to that. And there are women who are more vulnerable to light at night, and you'll not be surprised when I tell you that women with PCOS are in that population of vulnerable women to light at night.
Well, and I think what can be hard to convey is how much of a difference it can make. And also even a source of light coming in that you may not think could possibly affect it. Like you said, your clock, your alarm clock, or even a street light beside your window or something. It doesn't, in certain way, it doesn't make logical sense in the moment that something as simple as that could make such a profound impact on your cycle, but it does.
It's a subtle impact, though, Lisa. It's and I know this from NFP teachers that they got interested in it because they were seeing women who wanted to become pregnant, and there were these subtle issues with the cycle. like the mucus patterns weren't correct, but it wasn't that they were having irregular cycles. And once they got the light at night cleaned up, then they went on to get pregnant. Now, I don't have a big research study to tell you that. This is anecdotal evidence of it. The notion of the melatonin affecting the cycle goes back to 1968. That's when the first study was done, where they put a table lamp up and told the women to sleep in the presence of this table lamp, and they got an effect on the cycle doing that. So it light at night turns on the brain. And that's the other, just what I have encountered professionally is not so much to do with the menstrual cycle, but with sleep hygiene. And it is, you don't answer that email after 7:00 at night. You're going to turn your brain back on. You don't want to be doing late at night computer work and what have you because of the effect on you when you're doing that. Now, college students don't really want to hear you tell them that, but it is the message that they need to have about if they're having, specifically if you're having difficulty sleeping. And difficulty sleeping has long-term consequences. We see more cardiovascular disease in people who have sleep problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting just to see how all of these things are related. And also very interesting to see how these different things can affect the cycle. I can resonate with why you've been in this field for as long as you have and doing as much research as you have, because there's just always something else to look at. Do you have any new research on the horizon or any exciting trends that you've seen or specific interests that you've developed lately?
Well, right now I'm doing a couple of studies, and the first one is fertility health knowledge in university students. And we've collected our data at Western University of Health Sciences, at SIUE, and at University of Delaware. I kind of wanted that coast to coast. What do the students know about their fertility? They don't know very much. I can say that. Males know a little bit more about males than women know about males, which you would kind of expect. And the other study that I'm doing, which I'll submit for publication pretty soon, is I compared the Clear Blue monitor to the inexpensive generic LH stick and to see how it performed in picking up the peak day. And the inexpensive LH sticks, you're not getting the estrogen rise that you get with the monitor, but the inexpensive sticks, when used with a fertility algorithm, performed very well, very well. Remember, the monitor is the gold standard because of the comparing to ultrasound.
So how much?
So it doesn't have to be expensive. You can get 50 of these generic sticks for $21.
Well, and how much is the Clear Blue monitor going to run you? I've never looked it up.
You can get it on Amazon for about $120 or so. And the sticks are $38 for 30 of them, which lasts about 4 months. So you spend more on coffee if you go to Starbucks than you would on your fertility.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's just a choice. It's a choice of what you want to spend your money on.
Well, and given that you have experience in both methods, so what was it that made you gravitate to this one? It sounded like it was kind of mostly the mucus, because then with this, you could opt not to watch your mucus.
Yeah, I liked the idea of empowering couples to use what works for them. I have couples who want to use the monitor mucus and temperatures. They're a little anxious, but they wanted to be able to do that. And I have couples who only wanted to use a monitor. So I like empowering couple to make that decision because they own their fertility. They own their decision making. And I got frustrated for my couples that were good with the method and they got frustrated either with abstinence, length of abstinence, or they got pregnant and it was a good time to be pregnant. Of course, they were very accepting of that. I had one woman who she had an ectopic pregnancy, which is a tubal pregnancy, and came to find out that she had an STD when she was in college that she didn't know about. And so we really had to work with her. And I had another woman who had gone for typical assisted reproductive technology stuff. And when she came to see me, she was 39 years old. and she had never been pregnant and had never succeeded. And they offered her in vitro fertilization, and she just didn't want to go that route. And so she came to see me, and I referred her to a NAPRO technology medical consultant. Turned out she had endometriosis, and they did the surgery, and she got pregnant, and she had terrible endometriosis. It was all over her intestine and everything, and they were going to have to do a second surgery. And he told her, 2 months down the road, we're going to have to go back in and take some more off. And well, she got pregnant in the meantime, which was wonderful. And so she had her baby like at 41 years of age. And then they were just thrilled. She told me to make her poster child for our method. Then she was never able to conceive again after that. She did conceive. She had miscarriage and then was never able to conceive. At least she got one baby out of it. And I came to understand endometriosis is an inflammatory kind of condition. So that kind of goes back to all those things that we're exposed to that are causing inflammation in people's bodies. Mm-hmm. And so, things that you've already mentioned.
Definitely. Well, and I think that in this day and age, it's a blessing to have so many different options. And I know that some women gravitate more to tech. I'm not sure if it just makes them feel more secure to have this device that is kind of confirming, their suspicions. And so I know that a lot of people really find comfort in that. And also a number of women find that the tech piece of it, having like a good, like fairly pricey piece of tech, makes it more serious. So when you say,
who really
honey,
likes that,
I'm using this method, exactly, then all of a sudden, like the stereotypical guy comes around because he's like, okay, we've invested in this tech. It works. It has buttons and lights.
Right. That's the guys who like the technology, but he's got to be on board too. So you can't really ignore that, So the other thing is that about this as a couple method that's so wonderful is, like I've had patients who are breastfeeding and what have you, and I've had the husbands have done the charting. I have one couple, he's an accountant. He's like detail. He does all of their charting. She just tells him and he charts it. And I also tell my couples, if you don't have a sense of humor, you can't use this. I'm sorry. You really need to have humor about it.
Well, you're talking about mucus all the time and all that kind of stuff. You have to have a sense of humor.
You can communicate. I had one couple that he traveled in his job, and they had a nightlight. And if he came home and the nightlight was green, he could wake her up. And if it wasn't, he could not. Which
that is so funny.
Yeah. There you go with the humor,
That's really funny.
The communication is enhanced by the humor.
And the accountant, partner recording everything. I love that so much. Because I think one of the things that comes out in the work that I do, and I'm sure that it's come out in the work that you do, is just how supportive and incredible partners really can be and really are when it comes to this method. And I've just found that with the women who I'm working with who are partnered, their partners for the most part are just really supportive, and it's just a great way to communicate. So many different benefits of this amazing method. Well, Dr. Barron, it has been such a treat to have the opportunity to talk to you and to pick your brain a bit about some of the research that you've done. And I would just love for, looking back at everything we've talked about today, we covered a lot of ground, but what is one thing that you would like our listeners to take away from our conversation today?
I think that they should go the countercultural way and really give natural family planning, fertility awareness, a real serious look over, because it's such a healthy, beneficial thing for couples to use. It's just a whole different way of thinking about things, which encourages growth. So the culture says artificial, and convenient, but this is just a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Well, and I'm putting together a series, so it's very possible that by the time our interview airs, it's going to be aired already. And if so, I'll just link to it in the show notes. But I'm putting together a series. I'm interviewing a few women in my community, in my Fertility Friday community, who have had different experiences on hormonal contraceptives and also after they've come off of them. So this whole notion of convenience, well, is it convenient if, you use an artificial hormone that causes you to experience anxiety, depression, lose your libido? And super convenient.
Yeah.
Well, and for our listeners that want to learn more about you and the work that you do and even dive into some of the research that you've done, where can they go to find more information?
Well, the MarquetteFertilityEd.com will have my contact information on it. And my articles, if they just do Barron and then ML and PubMed, there's quite a few that are going to come up there.
I'll see if I can link to a few.
And then if you want to write to me with anything that you're not able to get, I can send you a PDF of it if you want.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm a research junkie, so I think that you're going to get an email from me.
Well, I have a PDF of almost everything I've written, so it's not a problem to send for me. Personal copy is legal. So.
All right. Well, thank you, because I will take you up on that. Definitely. I was looking at some of the research that you were doing, and yes, and yes.
Okay.
So thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you. Thank you for listening. You can find the show notes for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/158. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Dr. Barron. It was a lot of fun to be able to chat with her about the Marquette method, because I don't know a whole lot about the Marquette method. So I was learning just right there along with you. And it's really interesting to note how the clear blue monitor is used to identify the surge of estrogen that happens in the pre-ovulatory phase that does lead to the cervical mucus production. So it's interesting to see the different ways that this information can be applied for the purpose of charting. So I think it's really interesting too how we each gravitate to whatever we're most comfortable with. So I know personally for me, I gravitate to the method of mucus, and that's something that I've been doing for so long. And I also have it in the back of my mind, like, I'd love to have a method that doesn't require continual funding, if you will. So something where I learn it once, I put in my investment the first time, but then I'm able to figure it out throughout my life, and I don't really need to rely on anything external to me. So that's part of the reason that I really like relying on mucus and temperatures, because I might have to replace my thermometer every 10 years, but other than that, it's pretty self-sustaining. But with that being said, I recently released a post. I don't know how recent it is by the time this airs, but I released a post about temperatures, and it's called, "Do you need a fancy thermometer to track your temperatures?" And so I'll link to that article in the show notes. But I think what's most interesting about that article is that I had a lot of feedback on it, and I left it open-ended as a question. I shared my perspective. So of course, my perspective is that don't let that be a barrier to you using the method. You definitely don't need a fancy thermometer that's expensive. You can really get by with a basic thermometer as long as it's giving you an accurate temperature reading that takes your temperature to at least the 10th of the degree, but preferably to 100th. So for example, 93.45. So it's giving you 2 decimal points. But other than that, there's nothing else, quote unquote, required. You can get by with that. But what's interesting is that a lot of women find comfort in spending a lot of money on whether it's a Daisy or a Lady Comp, so that it will record in your temperature and even have some predictive capabilities, or the Wink by Kindara, which is another, $100 thermometer that, again, links through Bluetooth to your Kindara app on your phone, and you can record it that way. And, I think that there's definitely pros and cons to both. And ultimately, it comes down to what you gravitate to. So if you love tech, if your partner loves tech, if this is something that helps your partner come on board because it's something that you can share with your partner, and you just love cool technology and you find it to be really convenient, then, why not? If you like the fact that it records your temperatures because it makes it easier for you not to have to remember to go in and add them into the app, I feel like that's great. So either way, it's great. And so I love hearing different perspectives on the show and different methods, because it's important to know that we're all working towards the same goal, which is body literacy, to help women to take control of their fertility, to understand it better, to understand how their cycles work, to know that you can't get pregnant on every single day of your cycle. And if you can identify that small window of time when you can actually conceive, then you can use that information to avoid pregnancy or to achieve pregnancy, regardless of how you do it. And so I was really happy to have Dr. Barron on the show and interested also to delve into the research that she's done. So make sure to head over to the show notes page. I'll link a number of her research articles and things like that to the page, just if you're interested in delving more into some of the research that's been done on fertility awareness. So I'm sure you'll find that to be interesting. So thank you again for listening to today's show. If you're looking to deepen into your own knowledge of the fertility awareness method or gain that confidence for using the method for avoiding pregnancy to really get that high effectiveness rate that we talked about in the show, or if you're just wanting some support, whether you're trying to conceive or trying to avoid pregnancy, make sure to head over to my Work With Me page and take a look at my program. So that's over at fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. And if you're not sure which program is the best fit, then make sure to set up your free 15-minute consult. And you can do that right there from the Work With Me page. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. So I just want to thank you all for hanging out with me today, for listening to the show and supporting the show, for sharing the show with your friends. Over the past almost 3 years of podcasting, I've seen just an enormous amount of growth. And so I know you're out there listening and you're sharing the show and you're spreading the word. And the feedback that I get is just so positive. Really, as a woman who learned this method, I had the exact same reaction 16 years ago when I first discovered this method. You know, why wasn't I taught this? Why doesn't every woman know this? And what can I do to make that happen? And so just by you being out there, listening to the show, supporting the show, sharing the show with your friends and talking about it, more and more and more women are going to learn about the fertility awareness method. And we're really going to work together to get that word out. So thank you so much for being a part of this movement that we're starting out here. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.